for joining me.
To be here.
Absolutely. And so, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself and your books, and we'll get things rolling from there.
Sure. So I'm R.E. Sanders. You can call me Rob. I go by my initial because there's other people called Rob Sanders in the world. I'm a fantasy author from the UK. I've been writing on a number of subjects for my whole life, like since I was at school. The teachers would say, "Oh, you have to do this, you have to do that," and then they'd go, "Or you could do a piece of creative writing."
Ooh,
One day later, I'd come in with a 3,000 word short story and go, "There you go. Can I have my A, please?" So I've always loved to write. I've written fiction, non-fiction, and I had this idea in my mind of a fantasy book. And it was during COVID, actually. I had COVID myself, and I was like, what am I going to do? And I started looking through some of my old notes. I was like, actually, do you know what? There's something here. There's something worth thinking about here. So that was 2.5 years ago.
wow.
That's when I really knuckled down and thought, actually, I'm going to make a go of this, and started writing. So that's where I started.
That's fantastic. It's interesting because I've heard a few people say that COVID was the thing that gave them the time or the motivation to actually start writing, and it's just snowballed from there for them. So I love to hear that you had that moment as well where you could just, yeah, I can do this. I
Yeah,
can
and I
start
think it
this.
was probably a good timing where maybe my life experiences had got to the point where I felt I had something more to say.
Right.
I mean, this story started 20 years ago. Me and my friends down the pub and sort of thought, oh, we did a lot of RPG fantasy kind of thing. What would we do? And we both had maps, and that was where it started. But that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
And I wrote a bit and then put it on the back burner. And then that time in COVID was like I started rereading and got the urge to add to it, really.
And did you like piecemeal ideas over the years, collect them on scraps of paper, or did you just kind of let it simmer after your initial
No,
brainstorm?
I had a very clear idea what was going to happen at the start of the book. And then after that, it was a bit hazier. So I'd written to the point where I knew what was going to happen. And when I picked it up again, I realised actually the story doesn't start here. This is all fluff. The story starts
Oh,
here. And that's actually the story of Demon's Tear. So in it, there's a young man, and it initially started with him being a child and growing up. And I realised as I was rewriting it, you don't need to know that. I mean, it's good for me to understand where he is to write his character, but for the reader, it's probably not the most exciting bit of it. But
right. Okay.
there's an incident, and it all kicks off from there, really.
Brilliant. So, speaking of The Demon's Chair, congratulations, as that's your upcoming novel, right?
Very much, yeah. It's just in the final stages. I'll show off because I've just had a proof where
By
the
all means. Got to show off those book babies.
it's printed in a nice glossy cover, which I took some opinions on, but in the end, I just got two printed and thought which one I like the best, and I like the glossy one the best. So it is more or less done. I've scheduled the first arcs to go out in about 10 days.
Oh, nice.
I'm hoping I can stick to that. Kind of depends on a few things, but yeah, I should be able to start getting arcs out then, and then it's scheduled for full release on the 1st of June, which is definitely achievable.
And that's coming up fast.
Yeah, it'll come up really fast. And actually, funny enough, 1st of June was more or less when I started writing it. When I first sat down
Really?
and wrote the first lines, because I kept a calendar of what I was doing. And 1st of June was when I started writing it. So it's nice.
That's really cool. I love that it's going to be its first birthday,
Yeah.
right on the dot. We have Richard here. Hello, Richard. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Yes, it is a great looking book. I love that the colors pop on it. Could you show us your other series as well that you have, A Path of Blades, and just the covers for those too?
Yeah. So the first, this is confusing because they're not. The first book I wrote is not the first book. So I'll show you Path of Blades first. So this is Path of Blades. So this is a cover I designed myself,
Oh,
which is
nice.
quite basic, quite simple. I think it works for the type of story it is. I was quite influenced by like Japanese samurai kind of stories of honor and duty and that kind of thing. And I think that kind of fits that. So there was a real reason I went for a cover that was quite a plain like that. It's a short fantasy novel, a standalone fantasy novel. It's a quick read. My wife read it in a weekend, got very cross with me.
The best kind of reaction you can ask for as an author. Get the pitchfork mob.
Yeah. So that's about a knight called Ingvar, and it's kind of like a mini Game of Thrones, really, because there's all sorts of plots and intrigues that he gets involved in, and he has to make lots of decisions about what he really wants to preserve. Does he want to preserve his honor? Does he want to preserve his family or his relationships? And he just gets caught in a tighter and tighter net.
Right.
It's delightful. It's great. Not no good for him, but yeah, fun for me. And then the other book I've got in my collection is Tan's Last Stand, and that's a cover designed by my friend Paul, who did a lot of the artwork in Demon's Tier, which maybe I'll show off in a minute. There's chapter headings and stuff that is specific to the characters. It's really cool. I'm really pleased with it.
Oh,
So Paul designed this. This is the first thing I wrote because I wanted to see if I could do it. Like I said, when I picked it up in COVID, I was like, can I? I want to do it. Can I write a whole book? Can I write a whole book, start to finish?
Yeah.
So Tan's Last Stand was my first effort. It's a novella. It's pretty short. You can see it's pretty thin. It's essentially a retelling of that Magnificent Seven Samurai, that kind of idea of getting a band of old warriors together with all their foibles and different characters and trying to make them work together.
Okay.
So my focus there was on just completing it start to finish and fleshing out characters rather than thinking of a brand new story. It's a pretty well used story. I mean, it's Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven. That's been remade several times. It's similar to the Avengers, if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
It's similar to a lot of things. But chronologically, it sits between Path of Blades and my next one, my Demon's Tier.
So in terms of your 3 books, because you went from, let's see if can I do this, to now having 3, where would you recommend readers start?
I would probably read them in chronological order.
Okay. And you have a comment there.
You did there. You could shave with it. I'd start with Path of Blades. It's probably the easiest reading. It's a relatively short book for a fantasy novel. About 70,000 words. It's half the size of Demon's Tier. It's all action, really quick. Lots of drama. Gets you to the end pretty quick. And then Tan's Last Stand is another quite a quick read. And then chronologically, that is, I think, it's about 15 years after Path of Blades.
Okay.
It features some of the same characters. It doesn't continue the story. So if you didn't come be bothered reading Path of Blades and want to pick up this, you wouldn't be lost. Likewise, if you hadn't read either of those and picked up Demon's Tier, it doesn't assume any pre-knowledge. If you've read all of them, there are some little things that you'll go, oh, I know what you're talking about there.
Always love that.
At least regs for hardcore fans. Don't have hardcore fans. Maybe one day, we aspire to it.
That's always the goal, right? You'll get those messages. Welcome, Chris. Good to see you. I'm also excited to get to Rob's books here because they sound fantastic as well. And Brian, always good to see you. Thanks for stopping in. Look at that. Another one on the TBR. Awesome, Richard. So in terms of the Demon's Tier, something that caught my eye was the tagline, and I'm going to read it quick. It says, "No prophecies, no destiny. The new heroes of our time will choose themselves." I'd love to know where your inspiration for that concept came from.
Yeah, so very early on, when I was sort of bouncing ideas with me and my friend, we wanted characters that were the characters that carried the story. So characters that didn't change, characters that weren't forced into doing anything, but created the story through their decision making and in a relatable and believable way. So in Demon's Tier, the people you meet make decisions and follow what they think is the right thing to do. And there's no sense that anything is preordained. There's no sense of fate. They refer to fate, but in fate in kind of like a luck kind of way. There is a god of fate, but not as in there is a path that is chosen. I mean, Wheel of Time comes back into my mind again and again and again because it's such a huge influence on me, obviously. And in that, obviously, Rand is guided by this prophecy, and they're all destined to do certain things. I mean, that's all well and good, but it's not what I wanted to write. And so it was a very deliberate step away from that. That's why I came up with the tagline. I wanted to show people that you can do it a different way. Like people can be making decisions. So that applies to the goodies, if you like, the protagonists, as well as the people on the other side. They make decisions that lead them down the path, which sets them on both sides. So hopefully that is an explanation that makes sense, because I think we're very familiar with the idea of prophecies, destiny. I mean, Star Wars is another example. And that's what I didn't want to do. I wanted to do something where the people at every stage are able to make their own decisions, and they often make bad decisions, and that's going to happen, and terrible things are going to happen as a result. But it's going to be their decision. It's going to be in their hands.
Well, that's exactly, what I got from it was that tagline. I was like, "Oh, that's ominous," 'cause humans, especially, there's so much you can do with morality, ethics, choices, all of that, and oftentimes in fantasy that I've read, it doesn't always end well.
No. So, little mild spoiler,
Right.
one of the characters, there's two groups of characters. One of the characters, one of the main characters is called Ian Conno, and in about chapter 6, 7, so quite early on in the book, he is left with a terrible decision to make. And the decision he
Okay.
makes at that point it'll affect the rest of his life. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's never certain whether he made the right decision or not.
Well, I love Richard's comment here, "We wouldn't have a story without bad choices," so
Yeah.
and, welcome, BA, great to see you, hail, and Brighton, always good to see you, welcome. So in terms of writing from your first book to now your third, is there anything that you've done differently in terms of releasing it? So whether it's the beta reading stage, the editing, and the actual publication part, has there been anything that you've done differently, or did you find a way that works for you from A Path of Blades?
No, Path of Blades very much taught me how to do it. So by the end of that, I think I was I'd come up with a method of writing and finishing. And what I learnt, and I'm still applying at this stage in Demon's Tear, is to give myself
Mm,
longer. Don't rush things.
yeah.
Don't pin myself down on a release date too early,
Mhm.
because you end up rushing things through. I mean, I don't think Path of Blades suffered because of it, but there was one typo that really upset me. But if I give myself a bit longer, might have caught it. So I've given myself a longer process uh,
Right.
to finish it off. Because yeah, I finished it. Like I said, I think I said to you before we started the call. I finished the
Mhm.
book, writing the book on Christmas, just on
Yes.
Christmas Eve, and it's months later. But I've been working on it the whole time, and it feels like nothing's happened. But it's that bit that really takes the time to think about it, to read it carefully.
Yeah.
I didn't do so much of that with Path and Blades. I'm glad I've done more of it with Demon's Tear.
Sean is in agreement where Path of Blades is a great read, would highly recommend it. Great to see you, Sean, as well.
Hi,
Thanks for
Sean. Yeah,
stopping
Sean's a
in.
good friend. I'm currently reading his debut
Bar.
novel, Spricket the Bard. Yeah, really enjoying it. It's all sorts of things happening. It's great.
I'm excited to get to that one too, because I love a good bard and I love shenanigans. So
Yeah,
I think I'm in for a treat.
Pratchett-esque is how it's described, and I would
Oh,
say that's
nice.
a very complimentary comparison. Yeah.
Excellent. And so with your reader audience, because that's always something, right? When you're an author, you have a kind of a specific reader you either have in mind after you've published your book. Is there, if you were to look at your ideal reader, what would they be like?
Well, I'm going to give you an answer that probably sounds a bit sickening, but I
No.
myself, like, this is
Yeah.
the sort of book I would want to pick up and read
There you
if
go.
I was a fantasy reader. So influences on me. I've already mentioned Wheel of Time, obviously
Mhm.
Tolkien. David Gemmell was something I read like obsessively through my late teens. And it's that sort of book, realistic, human-based fantasy. Uh,
Mm.
there are otherworldly elements, there are fantastical elements, there is magic, but really the key is the people and the decisions they make and the interactions they have. So my ideal reader will be anyone who likes that sort of thing, and wants more of it. Your classic fantasy reader, really.
Mm. I love it because there is a difference, right? When you get from classic to more modern or epic fantasy, there is a tonal difference and world difference as well. John here, welcome. Good to see you, John. That's all right. YouTube's just they're trying to get you. That's all it is. So actually, I wanted to make a comment because you had mentioned you spent more time with the editing process. There's an author, Kobe Zucker from Nomads of the Sea, who I had the opportunity to chat with him as well. And he was talking about how he wrote the book in 3 months because he was in full isolation at the time and he couldn't work. So he's like, well, I'm gonna spend my entire time doing this. But then he spent, I believe, a year or a bit longer on the editing and the double
Wow.
checking. He spent a long time going through that book with a fine-tooth comb and it shows. I do appreciate that as a reader because I think it does show a little bit more in terms of, you have more eyes on it, right? If you're
Yeah.
getting other people to read it, you're getting opinions, you're taking the time to make adjustments as you see fit. all of those things do show in the writing at the end result. So,
Absolutely. What I did this time as well, which I will definitely do again,
mm,
was I got my first proof printed. I got the proof printed early, mostly because I got maps and images, and I wanted to make sure it all came out right. But then I sat down with the book and read it like a book rather than
yeah.
scrolling through on the screen. I read it like a book, like a reader would read a book, and annotated it. And I put some pictures on Twitter of like this mad
Yes.
post-it sticking out everywhere. But so every time I spotted something, real nitpicky things like an apostrophe in the wrong place, I annotated it and then went on. But reading it like a book out of the paperback was a completely different experience to look at it on the screen, and I saw a lot more
Yeah.
that I hadn't noticed from just looking at it on the screen.
Oh, that's great. I think that's, I've seen a few authors do that. One is, Crystal Matar. She's done that as
Oh,
well. She's got those
yeah,
chunkers, and she's got her whole notepad and everything, and
it makes sense. I mean, my work has me sitting exactly in this position a lot of the time, looking at the screen. So anything I can do that gets me away from the screen is good. So I write my first drafts by hand. I don't know if you've seen that either. I think Demons Tier filled 3.5 A4 notepads.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it means I can take it anywhere. Like if I'm going
Yeah.
to watch my son do swimming or something, I can sit there and writing. I can take it to the pub.
Yeah.
Be sitting any time. Whereas to sit behind a laptop screen and type is a
Mm.
bit less sociable. Also, I'm terrible with distractions, so if I've
Yeah.
just got a bit of paper and a pen, I'll just write. And
Yeah.
I found that really well.
I find that too whenever I'm trying to work on something on my laptop, or I'm trying to, read off my phone just because the convenience of it. I 9 times out of 10, I'm not reading. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
too distracted. And, we have Bo here with us as well. Welcome, Bo. Great to see you.
Oh,
And I'll open it up to the folks in the chat. If you have a question for Rob, by all means, pop them in. We will cover those questions too. Until then, we're going to move into our next section here, which is in terms of your own reading. I know you talked about the Wheel of Time and some of your other influences, but if you're looking at your reading journey from the time that you started, where did it all start for you? Your passion for storytelling and stories in general?
I don't remember my
Oh, hey, that's a good thing.
early times. You know what I mean? I don't remember what I started reading. I've just remember I've always
Okay.
read. It was always something I
Hey,
was really obsessed with. I remember just reading and reading and reading. Like Dick
yeah.
Smith, Roald Dahl, really good British children's authors. And then I think it must have been Lord of the Rings was the first fantasy book I read. I remember my dad he
Mm.
probably said, "I bet you can't read this" or something like that. And I remember taking a Fellowship of the Ring away to a French exchange, and it was like, what? Absolutely mind blowing experience because I'd never imagined such a huge, immersive fantasy world, like a fictional world that felt so real and vivid. So I think that
Yeah.
was the first step into fantasy, and then from there, obviously, I read Lord of the Rings pretty obsessively. I probably read it once a year,
Mm.
and then David Gemmell was another
Yeah.
storyteller who he's got a really different voice to Tolkien, but there is a you can see the influence there, and he writes
Mhm.
stuff on the verge between historical fiction and fantasy. So
Right.
there's a series set in Iron Age Britain, but it's all imagined, so it's not historically accurate at all. But it feels a bit historical fiction, that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that. Then I found Wheel of Time, obviously read through that. Trying to think of other things I've read. I do like historical fiction an awful lot. Con Eagledon, a really good author. Bernard Cornwell, I read pretty obsessively. Saxon Saga. Finished reading the Saxon Saga just before I wrote Path of Blaze, and I think if you put those two together, you'll see the influence. Yeah, it was a very deliberate thing to try and be more like Cornwell because I think he writes with such fantastic efficiency.
Mm.
No flowery descriptions, and there's no real deep dives into characters, but he
Mm.
communicates all really well. And his vision of Dark Age Britain is eye opening because I've studied. You mentioned I've archaeology degree. I've
Yeah.
studied Dark Age Britain, and the thought was, well, we don't know anything about it. Well, we don't, but someone like Cornwell can make you feel like you do.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Because Cornwall is one that I've been wanting to get to for a while, but I've also been working my way through Gemmell and some of those other authors, Anna Smith Sparks and stuff, and, it's one of those ones that kinda hangs over me. I've heard so many good things about Cornwall's writing,
Mm.
so
You just flow through the book. His prose
yeah.
is so easy to read, and it's like watching a TV program. It's just the images come into your head
Oh.
without really putting together. One thing I should say, like me, the one thing that's hanging over me, who I've never read, apart from his work on Wheel of Time, is Brandon Sanderson. I've
Oh,
never
really?
read.
Okay.
No, so he's someone I
Yeah.
probably definitely need to get around to, because I am occasionally, my writing is occasionally compared to Brandon Sanderson,
Oh, interesting.
which is someone I've never read. I probably should probably should close that loop.
I'm curious, where would you want to start with Sanderson?
I don't know. I've heard Way of Kings is a good
I
place to start,
I
or
think
Atlantis.
based on off of your ones that you've loved, probably Way of Kings. It's on a grander scope, it's a bigger
Mm,
world setting, more in depth with the characters and the history of the world, whereas opposed to his other ones are a little bit more adventurous and they go at a quicker pace kind of idea. There's still like the Sanderlanche and all that goes on,
yeah,
which is like the avalanche in the last 150 pages or so. But I think it's just on a far grander scale that you might appreciate more in the Way of Kings.
yeah. No, I'm pretty sure I'd love it. Something to get around
Sean's
to.
in agreement there.
That's for sure.
And we do actually have a question. I'm going to scroll back up, try and find it here. Sean asks, how long does transcribing from handwritten to the computer take? That's always intrigued me.
Not as long as you'd think. Um,
Okay.
it was kind of like a second stage. So drafted it by hand, and as I went on, I'd start writing it up. So I didn't write it all and then type it all. I wrote a bit, and then when I had a bit of spare time sitting on my computer, I just I'll type a chapter, type a chapter. So
Okay.
I think I finished. I was probably about a month behind. So I finished actually writing, start of December, and then I typed it all up by the end of December.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
type pretty quick, so
Yeah.
it's not a big deal. And actually, it provides a first edit, so I'd get to something underwritten and go, that's no good, doesn't make any sense, and I'd rewrite it as I was doing it. So almost like my first draft is my second draft.
Right. So you just take it little by little and kind of go as you can. Take it in stride, right?
And the other thing is I've got a couple of beta readers who are happy to read like sections at a time.
Oh,
So
yes.
I'll type up a section, I write in parts. So there's, I think,
Yep.
6 parts of DVT. I'll write a part and I'll send it off. And then I'll get some comments back
Yeah.
before I finish writing the next part. And I'll go, okay, well, maybe I need to change something, or maybe I need to explain this more. And it is quite a good way to write. And I'm really lucky that they're happy to read it in chunks.
Yeah. I
Well, my friend
actually
is always like, Rob, have you got the next part yet? Can we send the next part? She's already on me for sending her
Right.
parts of book 2, which I am writing, but I
Right.
haven't typed any up yet.
I've actually done a beta read like that, and I actually really enjoyed it because there was a lot of discussion with the author, much
Mm,
more so in comparison to some of the other beta reads that I've done, where it's kind of I leave my comments as I'm reading, and then the author goes in after I'm done reading, which is
mm,
however long. But in the sections, it was nice because you kind of went through and were able to have more in depth conversations, and that was a lot of fun. So I'm glad to
yeah.
hear they're not the only author doing that.
No, it works really well. And actually, at that point, you're normally quite happy to change stuff.
Mm.
If I'd given my whole book to someone and they came back with a little comments like now, like, ah, I'm
Change this
obviously
entire scene. This whole
yeah,
plot
change
doesn't
everything. That
work.
character's rubbish. Actually, on that, I got to the end of writing Path of Blades and I hadn't planned it out properly. We asked you a question about what would I change, right? I hadn't outlined it properly, and I realised that I'd written something that didn't make sense. And to change
Oh.
it, I had to go back basically to chapter 1 and add a new character.
Oh my gosh. That's so much work.
It
That
was,
a
but it made it better. It was definitely a
Okay.
load better once I'd done it. It was like, right, now the pieces fall into space. And actually, the character I wrote
Oh,
in as an extra bonus character is going to reappear in future works. So I think
okay.
I really enjoyed writing him when I put him in, but he didn't come to the part until much later.
Well, everything worth doing, it takes a little bit more effort, doesn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Brilliant. And Brighton has a question here as well. He's asking, would you say you like sword and sorcery?
Yeah. Well, sword and sorcery. I mean, I don't know. Is that just fantasy? Fighting and magic.
Uh,
I guess that's
I think
most
I
fantasy I've read has some of those elements in.
Yeah, I think some of the elements are similar, but I'm definitely not an expert on genres in that regard. I think it might have a more in depth with sword and sorcery, like with the magic and stuff, and
Mm,
than it would with a fantasy, just a regular fantasy. I'm not sure. Maybe Brighton can enlighten us in the comments
maybe.
there.
Well, I guess there's a magical something on the cover and a sword. So yes, and there's a lot of sword fighting and a lot of fighting generally. Although it's not the main focus of the book. There is a lot of magical elements, although with limitations in the first book.
And Sean has a
One was
question.
just asked me, yeah, what character? So
Yeah.
it's Sir Sigurd Vicari. He's an elf swordsman. He fights duels on behalf of Count Cromer.
Okay.
So initially, Sean, I was going to have Cromer fighting the last duel, but then that made lots of stuff not make sense. So, yeah.
Interesting. All right. And Indie Man, welcome. Good to see you.
I
Always
recognize a lot of these people from
fashionably.
social media, by the way, so it's quite nice to see them pop up.
And wizards, are always on time. Remember
Yeah.
that. And another question here from Richard. Do you have a preferred sword and why?
Absolutely. So there's a faction in Demon's Tier that me and my friend spent a long time detailing up. There's a lot more detail than I can possibly put in the book.
Okay.
About how they fight, what they carry in their pockets. But we started on the idea of what if there was a medieval army who used two-handed swords, great swords, but finessed them, so they were expert. How would that work? Would it be useful? How deadly would they be? And the conclusion we came to was that would be deadly. They would be horrific. So and then it led to the design of the country. So why did this happen? So I've written some of the deep history of that country to explain why the people they fight against tend to be the sort of people who it works very well if you're fighting against. So they fight in spear formations. With a great sword, you can really get in there. In fact,
yeah, by show and tell. I love it.
A prop. This is a.
Oh, nice.
This is a hardwood greatsword that I made myself. You can't quite see the side of it. I'm sitting down, but it's
it's tall.
Comes up to my chin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa, but for a big sword, you can move them surprisingly quickly. There's a guy on YouTube called Montantinino, and watch him. Oh my god! And there's another guy called Brody who I follow on Instagram, and he's amazing as well. And he's also a great sword, and it's actually a very fast sword. You wouldn't want to go near someone, really.
It's surprising because that would be very heavy, but I guess the momentum would take it.
Yeah, but they're balanced, so
okay.
Yeah, you sort of move with the flow of the sword, and you have to be strong. But I mean,
yeah,
it's not so ponderous. It's like boom, boom, they're lightning fast.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look that
up.
up.
My TikTok for demonstrations if you want.
There you go.
Occasionally go in the garden and wave it around. So yeah, it's TikTok.
Link in the description.
Yeah, I'll put something on Twitter later.
Brilliant, I love it. In college we actually had a sword fighting class that you could opt into, and they taught both medieval and Japanese style. And you could pick whichever wooden sword you wanted. It was so much fun because we learned traditional methods as opposed to like historically accurate, as opposed to the more fanciful fightings that you'll see in Renaissance fairs and stuff like that. Yeah. And I may have gotten a sword to the head a couple times by not blocking fast enough, so a couple of brain cells gone. So actually something I wanted to talk about too is you actually have a degree in archaeology.
That's right, yeah.
And I'd love to know how that influenced your research, influenced your writing and all of this, because obviously with the sword and tactics and military and points of history as well, because there's that historical fiction aspect. How did that age you, or did it influence you in other ways with your writing?
It's a definite help, and I don't know that I would write the way I do, and I certainly wouldn't build worlds the way I do without that knowledge, without the degree in archaeology. We studied everything from ancient Greece, the British Iron Age, Romans in Britain, the Dark Ages, through to like late medieval architecture. So I've done a whole gamut of it, basically. So I think one of the things it definitely has helped me with is understanding what different periods of history look like, because there is a temptation to go anything that's more than 500 years old is medieval and it all looks the same, which it isn't. So, example, if you read Wheel of Time, I would put that historically sort of 16th, 17th century. It's quite advanced. They have books, they have glass, they have candles are really prevalent. The clothing styles sound quite, I say modern. I'm British. 340 years ago is modern for me. Yes. Where my stories are set a good 200, 300 years earlier than that.
Okay.
So things like little things, and I mean, you could probably read through and not notice, but they don't. Books are rare, candles are rare. They don't necessarily have glass in the windows.
Spices would be rare as well back
Yeah,
then,
so
would be harder to
there's a
find.
thriving trade in spices from the
Mm,
country that produce them, and crime links to it as well. Um,
fascinating.
so definitely, yeah, it gave me that. It gave me a what I'm very fascinated is in the beginning of things and the origin of cultural practices and habits,
Mm,
and how that links to beliefs and faith, because there's a strong
mm,
faith in the world. But
yeah.
the belief in it is pretty widespread. And just how that affects culture, how it affects architecture, how it affects the structure of
Mm.
society, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to study.
I can imagine you're like a kid in a candy store, right? You're writing this book, you have all of this curiosity and the knowledge to help support that exploration and the questions of how and why did they do it. You'd be like a kid in the candy store going nuts, picking out all the different candies, mixing it together, trying to find answers and make your own world and your own answers to everything.
Yeah,
Um,
often my challenge is not writing too much in the way of background and exposition, because I could go down rabbit holes, but it's trying
mm.
to give flavors of cultures without going over the top with it.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because then when you get those cultural mixes, you often end up with clashes of some kind, or the begrudging agreements,
Mm.
right? To work
That is a very
together.
strong theme of book two of the Jalkai saga. Is an oppressed nation and what they
Mm,
can do about it.
yeah.
I'm not going to say any more than that because I can't.
All right. Read and find out, folks. That's
Absolutely.
and Rachel, welcome. No worries. Always fashionably on time when you are a
Indie Man
wizard.
has just asked a question, which I'll answer.
Oh
No,
yes.
not Red Malazan. Another one on my list that I haven't got around to. If I'm comparable, then great. But yeah, no, I've not read any.
Okay. Yeah, Malazan is like a whole other scale. And it like, I know for myself, I actually wanna go back and reread the first 4 books because when I read them, I went in with the mentality of, which was recommended to me by Bryce over on, Shelf Centered, and he's like,
Got you.
"Just don't try and understand anything. Don't. You're gonna have a horrible time if you try and understand it all. Just go with the experience. Go with it. If you're confused, you're gonna be confused for a while, right?" And, so I think now that I have a better understanding, because by the time I got to book 3 and book 4, I was starting to put pieces together, starting
Yeah,
things started to click. I'd love to go back and read it from the beginning again and go straight through and just see if I can have a bit more of a cohesive read as opposed to like, "What is
yeah.
happening? Who are these 20 people we didn't meet in the first 4 books?"
Oh well, that is something um, I was wary of, was to
Mm,
introduce too many characters. I know some fancy authors just go for it. Whatever, we're going to have millions of people, but I've kept it quite tight in terms of main characters and names. In the book, in the first book, is going to start to expand. But hopefully, by the time it expands, you're familiar with the main people.
right. And, I just wanna say hello to Timothy here, welcome, and Rachel has a question for you.
Yeah,
I
and
think,
it's a good one. Yeah.
yeah, epigraphs are an interesting tool to hint at greater world around the book. Have you considered using these? If not, why?
Well, I have used one. Yes. So I've written in full or in brief, some in full, um, myths and histories of the world in the style that they would have been written in the world. So, for example, in the country of Banagar, which is where the story starts, I've written a 680 line poem in Anglo-Saxon literative verse to tell the story of the world. And that story is hinted at in the prologue of Demon's Tear. So
Okay.
I have I've mulled over the idea of reading the whole thing out, maybe not like over maybe 10 TikTok videos or something. It would take a long time, but it's the style. The Anglo-Saxon style is designed to be spoken. It's a very alliterative, very percussive, so it doesn't rhyme, but you use repeated syllables. Anyway, that's not answering the question. I'm getting sidetracked.
No, no, by all means, it's
So,
fascinating.
so Demon's Tear, the very introduction of Demon's Tear, you won't be able to see it, but in the first page is an
Yeah.
epigraph from one of the myths of the world called Prathin, Pramithrin, which is the story of the two swords being Jantakai. And it says, "Sing muses of life and death, of war and peace, of betrayal and hope, of two brothers and the forging of the swords."
Hmm.
That's the very start of the book.
Interesting. I always try and keep track of those when I'm reading, and I always try and puzzle them out as I'm reading. I never usually get it right. Because authors, you take so much liberty, you can twist it every which way that I wouldn't expect, but I absolutely love it. It's very what's the word I want to put to that? It leaves a lot of questions.
Oh,
I
that's
want
the
to know.
idea.
Yeah.
And I haven't included anything. There's things in the book in Demon's Tier that
Mm.
the ends maybe don't tie up in this book, but they're there for a reason. And I promise, by the time we get to the end of the series, which I'm looking at 5 or 6 books, I think it'll all be tied up. The questions will be answered. You'll
Right.
know why I included certain things that I did, um, and it'll hopefully close a load of loops. Patience is the key to this one.
Okay, I love to hear it, and I'd actually like to know too, because you have this degree in archaeology and this passion for history. What drew you to write more in the fantasy genre as opposed to just strictly historical fiction?
Well, I love the escapism you get with a fantasy world
Mm.
and the sort of open horizons. Like you can do anything, anything can happen.
Yeah,
It's almost I come back to Tolkien. I always come back to Tolkien. When Tolkien started writing Lord of the Rings, it was to create an alternative mythology because he felt that a lot of our British myths had been lost during the Northern Conquest and suppressed.
right.
Language was suppressed. So he wanted something equivalent, which is why he wrote that huge, deep history. And as a that appealed to me massively. Like
Mm.
the ability to go back in deep time and still have links of a thread of story that runs all the way through. So I love that. I have actually toyed with the idea of writing historical fiction, but I think I'd need to find something really compelling, something that I thought hadn't been done.
Mm.
And I don't think there's many little pockets of history where really good historical fiction hasn't already been written. So I wouldn't rule it out. And I do like the realism and like doing the research, finding out like what would they actually have worn, what would they have actually eaten, was this familiar?
Right.
So, something I found out. I'm going to digress again.
No, go for it.
Really common through all of human history up until about 200 years ago was sleeping twice a day.
I had heard of that.
And I can't remember the word for it, but basically you go to sleep at dusk,
Yeah.
but then you don't can't sleep all the way through to dawn because it's like 15 hours or something. So you sleep for 6 hours and get up at midnight. And like you'd get up and some people get up and pray, like you do your chores around the house that you didn't have time to do in the day.
Yeah.
Uh, you were limited by your lighting, and if you wanted to save candles before electric lighting or gas lighting, you when it got dark, you went to bed, but you wouldn't sleep all the way through. Yeah, second sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it fascinating, and I actually thought about writing it in because it was so common and prevalent. But then when I thought about it, it actually feels too weird. If,
Right.
if I had the characters getting up in the middle of the night and doing stuff, I think people would go, "What's going on here?"
It's
But
not it's not as common knowledge,
it's
even
not
from the
common
point of
knowledge, and it
history.
feels so alien. Like it feels such an
Yeah.
odd thing to do. So there is a faction in the book that who do it, and the other people think that they're weird. Um,
Right.
yeah, I just that's the sort of thing that when I hear, I go, "Ooh, that's interesting."
I mean, I could see the value of it, right? Which is like I bake bread, sourdough, all of that. So for me, fermenting for a period of time, sleeping, and then waking up in the middle of the night, doing the next stage, and letting it continue to ferment, fantastic. It would be perfect,
Yeah,
right? But it's a lot harder when you're sleeping a full cycle and then you have to wake up super early in order to get the next stage done. But it's not so early that you can go back to sleep,
yeah. I think it'd
right?
be a very hard thing to get into. But I don't know if we are like we're adapted so we could do it. We're just so conditioned to go.
Yeah,
We use the electric lights to moderate our environment, so we don't have to go to sleep. It's interesting.
right. It really is. It is, and I would wonder how they woke up naturally, right? Because I
Mm.
for myself, once I'm out, I'm out. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm not waking up until I'm good and ready. So I feel like I would sleep through that stage where I'm supposed to be awake.
Yeah, probably your
And
chickens set you up or something, isn't it?
yeah, that's probably it. Rachel, I think the history of the witching hour also came through from this piece as well. Interesting. And you mentioned that's a book. Do you know who the author is there, Rachel? And if you can share it, if not, no worries. So in terms of the reviews that I read for A Path of Blades, for example, a lot of the reviews seem to say something very similar about pacing, in terms that you drop readers right in the middle of action and you keep a pretty consistent, fast-ish pace throughout. That is, in my mind, that would be hard to pull off while trying to balance the other elements of storytelling with character arcs and plot and keeping a fast pace. Did you have a method to help you maintain that with all those other elements? Or is it just something that
Uh,
naturally came for you?
it was something I set out to do. It's something
Okay.
I wanted to achieve. Um, I wanted people to get to the end of a chapter and go, actually, I want to know what happens next. And pick up and get
Right.
to the next chapter. And then the first paragraph of the next chapter hooks you into, you want to know what happens. And I use a lot of tricks with writing out of chronological order
Mm,
to achieve that. And it's one of those things that if you do it wrong, it's but if you get it right, you can really keep people going through. So you'd start off with something happening that's tense, and then you go back a bit and say, do the build up to it. And you haven't
mm,
answered all the questions, so people go, "Oh, well, I don't know what happened. What happened." You're just telling something in a different order.
okay.
So I tried to do that. I tried to keep it snappy. I wanted to keep it a quick read. In fact, when I started writing it, I thought it might be a novella.
Okay.
Just to show how good my planning was, and it
Well,
just
you
grew. And the other thing, the other influence on me in terms of writing, which is quite a strange one for a fantasy author, is I read a lot of Lee Child. Um,
okay.
I read the Reacher
Interesting.
books, and they are like drugs in a book for me.
Yeah.
I literally can't put one down once I've started reading it, and I've tried to figure out what does Lee Child do that
Mm,
keeps me going, and actually it's the way the action snips through, and the way he uses short sentences at times and short paragraphs at times. I don't write the whole book like that, but occasionally I do to really keep things snappy. Um,
right.
Not dwelling on things to slow it down unless there's tension in slowing it down, and then you do. If you know something's about to happen or you think it's about to happen, then you approach it slowly. Um, so yeah, I'm quite pleased with the way it came out. And actually, one of the criticisms that I've had for Path of Blades is it could be longer. Um,
Oh, interesting.
some of the characters aren't that fleshed out. Some of the
Mm,
action skipped forward a bit quick. Some of the interventions later in the book, they come out of nowhere where they could be built up a bit more. And yeah, I accept that as a fair criticism, but it is a quick, short book. You
right.
can't
You
have both.
you kind of set the story structure the way you wanted to tell the story, and there's readers for everything,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, Demon Slayer is twice as long as Path of Blade, so it gives me more
Mm,
time to bring out those characters and give them their foibles and explain why they're doing things. And yeah,
I love it. I love that you're kind of sticking to your playground in your world as well.
yeah. Indie Magic
And
said he read Killing Floor in less than 48 hours. I absolutely believe that. Yeah, I can't stop
oh,
reading your book.
see, Lee Childs is one of those books that I've always seen on shelves. Like, you go to the used bookstore and they're everywhere. They have their own shelf. There's so many of them. And I've been curious to try them more so just to see what all the love is for. But
They're just so readable. Like there's nothing
yeah,
that clever, and they're all very similar.
right.
Um, I feel like it's a guilty pleasure. They're not highbrow, but the
Yeah.
writing is so stylistic. I don't think he's just back. I think he's very sharply observed to get that effect. To get that, I've got to read it. I've got to read it. I've got to read it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And Brighton here says, I think Reacher is a modern version of a sword and sorcery character like Conan.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Fast. Okay. Well, it sounds like Reacher is the one if I want to try. I should be trying that one.
Yeah.
So I'll open it up to the chat again. If you have any questions for Rob, pop them in the chat. But in the meantime, you and I are going to do kind of like a fun little bonus round, if you will.
I like fun.
So, in terms of your characters, if you could pick a character from any of the books that you've written and bring them into the real world, who would it be?
I've thought about this. Yeah, I saw the question. I thought, oh, who
Yeah.
would that be? Because a lot of my characters are quite hard work, or they're traumatized, and I didn't really want to babysit them. But there's a character in Demon's Tier who's a female. She wouldn't call herself a thief. She
Okay.
would call herself a businesswoman or an opportunist. Which,
Opportunistic. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Called Elia Jerim, and I think probably she would be quite fun to spend time with. She does have a very light-hearted approach to life,
Mm,
and that comes out in the book, even when they're having some quite tough times, she's generally quite upbeat, always positive. She's exceptionally driven, which is probably what helps that. She's absolutely determined to achieve what she wants to achieve, which
Yeah.
we'll explain in the book. But I think actually, away from the stresses of the story, she'd probably be the most fun.
Okay, and you might get a free snack out of that. Who knows? So, in terms of an author, living or past, that you could meet in person, and if you could have a cup of coffee or anything like that with them, what might you ask them from author to author?
This is another answer. It's not going to catch anyone by surprise. It's going to be absolutely what anyone could guess. Is it would be J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
I would love to know that. I imagine he might be quite grumpy being asked the same questions over and over again. But I would want
No.
to know. I mean, it's all very well for me to say, yeah, he wanted to write an alternative mythology, but I mean, who thinks that they can achieve that? It's a mad thing to do. I mean, some people think I might write a book, but you don't think, oh, I'll just write a culture.
Yeah,
But
a
that's essentially what
language.
he did. I don't know, like, where did the ideas come from? Like the
Yeah.
elves in Tolkien are just otherworldly, and I just can't get my head around how he came up with all the ideas.
I'm slightly pessimistic in this view. If I were to imagine what his answer might be, just from conversations that I've had with so many authors, because I've asked
Mm,
the question, like, how do you come up with these worlds? How do you come up with these characters?
mm,
All the problems that they have, and the answer is usually like, well, I just knew the story I wanted to tell. I knew the character. I just knew. And then I worked on it and I built on it and
mm,
I just kept writing and writing and writing until I got what I got.
yeah,
I mean, I would think some kind of similar answer because he seemed like a very, down to earth
yeah,
man, right? Very
yeah.
down to earth, very simplistic in ways, and, I can't imagine if it was overly complex. I mean, I hope there's an answer somewhere to
Well,
that
I think one of
question.
his answers might have been that, oh well, I made up all these languages, so I needed to have somewhere for them to live
Yeah,
while I spoke them to each other.
may as well just, flush out the whole language.
Yeah. People sometimes say to me, like, "How could you sit?" Like, if I'm not, I sit around a pad, so I can sit and write with people around, and like, how can you just sit there and write with me? Where do you get
Yeah,
from it? And the way I can explain it is, I've seen the film, right?
right,
I've already seen the film. I'm just writing down what happens.
right.
So when you see me writing, it's not the creative process. That is just the ideas coming out of my head. It's already
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, mind to paper.
Mm,
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it, right? You've already seen it, you're just
yeah,
writing it down.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's great. And next question here is, as an archaeologist, is there a point in history or a culture you'd want to go back and see for yourself?
Yeah, my fascination in terms of history is Dark Age Britain. I'm because the archaeological and historical record is so sketchy. There was all
Okay.
sorts of things going on in terms of culture. We call it the Dark Ages, but it's a misnomer. There was all sorts of
Mm,
fantastic things being made, done, poems written, things made. There's a lot of war. I don't
mm.
imagine the standard of living was particularly good. So I'd like to come back again, please. Don't leave me there. But
No,
yeah,
you get a pass back.
yeah. That's the period of history that I'm most intrigued about because so much change, particularly from a British point of view. You had the Romans leaving, and then
Mm,
the Angles and Saxons and Jutes arriving and settling, and then you had the Vikings coming in. And obviously, we used to look back and think of the Vikings as just attackers and raiders, but they
mm.
settled. They became part of us. They're
Yeah,
part of our culture. I mean, I would be astonished if I don't have some Viking heritage myself. My family from the northeast. It's
yeah.
yeah. I'd just be really interested to know what that felt like. What
Mm.
was that period like to actually be there?
To see
Probably
a
terrifying.
melting pot for the first
Oh yeah,
time.
huge melting pot.
Yeah.
Like all things changing. With that sort of Cornwall goes into this again. The idea of the
Yeah.
Romans as ghosts. They were
Mm.
there, and you can see there what they left, like these villas and incredible buildings that they have no idea how to maintain. Uh,
Yeah.
but they're kind of a bit scared of them.
Okay.
They think of them as ghosts. That's
Mm.
Cornwall's imagination of him. I can actually you can feel that. I think it's an interesting way to phrase that.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up more because that is fascinating.
Hmm.
And two final questions here. What do you hope readers walk away with after reading your books?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I hope they're entertained first and foremost. I
Yes.
hope the time they're reading it, they want to turn the page and they come away from it, feel like they've had a good time. But there's a deeper message. It's supposed to be hopeful. Things get dark, but they get better in the end. And characters have terrible times, but they find a way to live with it. I mean, it's not like people are broken and then they are fixed, because that's not the way the real world works. And I want this to reflect the real world. People get broken, but they learn to live with it.
Right.
You can come back from rock bottom. So some of the characters are going to have some really, really tough times, but they keep going. So I guess that's, as a deeper message, keep going, persevere, be hopeful. It's not as bad as you might think.
Okay, I love it. I love it. And Indie Man has a quick question here as well. Just a fun little doubt is your fave word. Also, potsherds.
Potsherds. Potsherd. You mean potsherds? Like
potsherds. I've never heard of this word.
Pottery.
Sorry, what is it?
Pottery. Little fragments of pottery you dig out of the ground.
Oh, okay. Potsherds.
So it isn't my favorite word, but it is a good one. When I did a dig in Romania when I was on my university course, and we did some excavations, and I pulled out the ground a bit of pottery with finger line decoration, so you could see the finger marks. And it was
wow,
3,000 years old.
That's amazing. We could probably have a whole chat about your experiences in archaeology, because that would be fascinating.
Sadly, we were supposed to go away every summer on our course, but the 1 year I was meant to go to the Outer Hebrides and do some digging there, which would have been great. It was foot and mouth in the UK, and we couldn't go anywhere, so I spent the whole time in the laboratory looking at bits of bone under the microscope.
Yeah, I mean, that's still really cool, right? When you're trying to, I guess not as cool.
I mean, it's really important. And the stuff you pull out and the conclusions you come to in the end can tell you a lot. But yeah, doing the actual practical bit of it. Hi, JCM. He just said hello.
Hey,
Hi,
Joe. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping in. So, I mean, every job has a boring aspect, I guess. So, in terms of where everyone here can follow you, follow updates, what's upcoming in your writing and your publishing, where can everyone find you?
I'm probably most active on Twitter. X,
Okay.
Just sort of conversationally. I don't really have I don't have any PR behind me, so I just tend to tweet whatever's on my mind. It might be pictures of my garden or pictures of my books, bits of my writing. I'm trying to do a bit of build up for Demons here, so I'm quoting some excerpts, which I think someone's mentioned, to show the cover art. I don't know, can I show you? Do I have to show you?
Okay, yes.
Let's see if it'll come out.
And that's coming out June 1st, right?
So June the 1st is Demons here. Hang on a minute. There we are. So I can show you them. So at the top of each chapter.
Oh, yes.
We've got some, and so they're unique hand-drawn icons, and each icon represents a character. So that is the sword representing Ian Conno.
Okay.
There's a different picture for each of the main characters, or sometimes each of the main factions, because it gets a bit more complex.
I love that. It's small details, but I love the small details that authors put into their books like that.
It really looks really good. I mean,
it does.
Does it add to the story? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it does look really good. So Twitter, I do a bit on TikTok. Like if I've got something to say, you're supposed to post twice a day, and like there's a TikTok format. I can't be bothered. But if you want to hear me about my books and my stories, check me out on TikTok, because I do occasionally pop up there and chit chat, like on Instagram. What else do I do? That's it, really. Like Demons here, which you've just seen the cover off. Show you it again.
Yep.
1st of June. Keep an eye out. I'll be putting updates for it. Pre-orders are already open for ebooks.
Nice.
Hoping to open up pre-orders for paperbacks probably this week. So that's that, really.
And links for all of that will be in the description below if you want a quick means of finding all of that and following Rob. By all means, go do that, folks. Go check out A Path of Blades and the novella that Rob has as well. In the meantime, while you wait for Demon's Cheer to come out, because there's some reading material there too while you wait.
Yeah. They're also I've got a website. I think there was a link on my X.
Yes.
And there's a load of short stories on there. So if you want to go and read bits of background history, short stories, it's all canon. So everything I write is all in the same universe. It's all canon. Anything I write really happened in the world. It's all part of the history. So go and check that out. Also, I'm going to have a short story featured in a anthology being released by Lost Boys Press later this year, called Insurgent.
Okay.
So that is another short story set in Banagher, which is the same place that Demon's Tear starts, and it's about 40 years before Demon's Tear. But Demeter references what happens in that short story. So there, it all links. There's recurring characters. There's stuff you'll recognise. So if you want to read more of me, particularly all the stories are free. Obviously, just go and have a look. And any other questions, put on Twitter, and I'll answer them.
I love it. I love it. So lots to read in the meantime, folks. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Rob. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with
Brilliant.
you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for all the questions from the chat. So they've been interesting stuff. It's been nice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, sharing your questions, your thoughts. Always loves hearing from all of you. And in the meantime, until next time, and as always, take care of yourself.